Welcome to Think Global Work Local podcast. In today's episode, we're thrilled to introduce to you Sally Jensen. Sally decided to move to Taiwan in 2022 after a short visit in 2019 and fell in love with the country. Having traveled around the world and acquired cultural awareness and multiple language abilities, Sally has carved out her unique path in the journalism as a climate activist. Welcome, Sally.
Hi, good to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for making the time to share with us about your experience as a climate activist. So, why don't you give us a brief introduction about yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sally Jensen. I'm a climate and ecology reporter at TaiwanPlus News. I think this is something that is on a lot of people's minds right now, and a lot of people have their own kind of spark that made them start to think about the planet, the future of humankind, constant worries. But for me, I think it was after graduating, I moved to China, and I remember there was a particular moment. I was living in Chengdu. I decided to go for a run, and I found that I could only run for about 15 minutes before I was like coughing and I was getting really out of breath, and it was just so grey and smoggy, and I just kind of thought, what is this? Like, this is really strange. And then I started looking into more about industrial pollution in China and then all over the world, and it really kind of opened my eyes to all of these issues that I'd really not thought about before. After that, I started doing more research into not just pollution, but, the climate and how that's changing. And being also half Peruvian, my mum's Peruvian. And so there was more stuff happening in Peru around, melting glaciers. I was also having just come out of university, I was becoming more aware of social issues. And I was also traveling more and meeting people and talking to them about the issues that they were facing on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of these people lived in rural areas, and often these are people most vulnerable to climate impacts and environmental pollution and things like that. So I was kind of seeing it at the same time, hearing about it online. I think, the internet has been a great educator in that sense. Being really out of cities, a lot of times you see something that perhaps in your mind when you were young, you had imagined a certain way. But then when you see it in real life, you're like, oh, that's not as beautiful as the books had made it look. Like my encyclopedia when I was a kid made all the coral reefs look super colorful and abundant, and then you see them and they're like kind of bleached and sad, and all of these changes. I thought, what is happening? It's kind of sad to see, and just to think that we are one of the last generations to really see maybe many kinds of species, many kinds of organisms. The future may not exist.
So the time that you spent traveling abroad and visiting Peru growing up actually influenced your passion for journalism as well. Is there any a specific environmental issues that you're currently focusing on?
So my focus is fairly broad. So the reason it's called climate and ecology is because there is the focus on the climate crisis and, rising global temperatures, rising ocean temperatures as well. So any kind of marine issues. I was recently down covering the typhoon, rising sea levels, all of the things related to climate. And then there's the ecology side, which is all biodiversity. I guess that encompasses environment. But ecology, I feel, is more inclusive of humans because we're so interconnected. We're so dependent on, the world around us that it can't not include humans, right? Agriculture, I think, is very important here in Taiwan. There's also the issue of energy, which obviously impacts climate. Why is the climate crisis happening? It's because of the energy that we're using, fossil fuels. And in Taiwan, specifically, this issue of renewables, as there's this drive to net zero, so the rapid expansion of renewable energy, climate justice, the human impact of all of these things that we're seeing, and a little bit of the history as well, because I find a lot of people kind of ignore that. How did we get here? Like, what is it about this globalized society? What is it about colonialism, for example, that has led to this point, that has led to our extractivist way of living as a global society? Obviously, pollution, that's a big part of it. So, for example, Formosa Plastics, one of Taiwan's biggest companies doing huge amounts of pollution in the US and also Vietnam, and there are protesters who recently came to Taiwan to protest that. There's like a link between what's happening in Taiwan and the rest of the world.
So what does a typical day look like for someone in your role?
So we do television news. This is broadcast media. Essentially, it's the daily news beat. We're looking at what is happening on that day. We're doing kind of short reports between about 2 to 3 minutes long. So if there is some breaking news, if it's going out to cover something like that, it might be a protest, which we might also know about in advance. It might be a disaster, which we don't know about in advance. We will work with a videographer and we will go down and cover it in person, write the report, get all of the footage that we need, interview people. Sometimes we do video interviews. So, if it's an issue that perhaps requires more in-depth analysis, for example, so yesterday TSMC announced that it's going to bring its 100% renewable electricity commitment earlier to 2040 rather than 2050. We need an analysis. So I interviewed a representative from Greenpeace Taiwan, because then they can, say why this is important, right?
Yeah.
But if it's something more visual, then we will go out and cover that.
I find your role is very interesting. So how did you end up landing your role here at TaiwanPlus? Because you're very passionate about journalism, about the climate, and you happen to end up in a role that you're actually really good at.
This has kind of been convergence of many different factors and experiences, and just kind of discovering what it was that I really wanted to do. And I think that was a lot through traveling. And like I say, like speaking different languages, I think that's what kind of ignited my passion for communicating across, these stories. I would talk to people that I would be like, wow, that is really not something within the scope of what a lot of people back home in the UK would even think about, and so like, how can I transmit this story that I find interesting and make it interesting for other people back home, And so that's when I started pitching articles in international media. That kind of, I guess, sharpened my journalism skills. When I was in Mexico and I met these 3 Taiwanese women who were living and working in Mexico, and they were doing these really awesome, this is something I really want to capture on video, which is not something I'd really done before. So I just got my phone and I asked them if I could, interview them and also follow them around a bit and just film them going about their normal days. And so I did that. And then I ended up cutting a 15-minute kind of mini documentary. I found that really helped when I came across this opportunity to work at TaiwanPlus, to be like, hey, look, I've actually proactively gone out and done this thing. I think they appreciated that. So when I was back in the UK, I was also going out and attending some events about Taiwan, educating myself more about Taiwan. I knew I wanted to come back as a journalist would be amazing. So I was kind of looking into Taiwan and the climate issue in Taiwan. And then I went to an event where now one of my colleagues, he was talking about his work at TaiwanPlus, which had just started. I spoke to him afterwards and I asked if they were recruiting, and he said, sure, you can send in your CV and you can apply. And so I did. I applied and I sent the work that I had done, and I was fortunate enough to be asked for an interview.
So you found your role actually outside of Taiwan.
So yeah, I was applying to various different things. It wasn't just that. I was honestly just reaching out to anything. But it was just impossible to get a visa to come back. And so I was very fortunate when the borders opened. And I just thought, even if I still didn't have the job, I'll just go, because I always feel like if you are there and you can meet people and you can talk to people, you can find out about other jobs and you can network and you can get to know people. It's a lot easier when you're there than if you're outside.
So what made you want to come back to Taiwan? I'm just curious.
I traveled in Myanmar and I met a friend, a really great friend. And after a few days of knowing me, she was like, Sally, I really think you would like Taiwan. And I was like, that's a strange thing to say. I don't know what that is. And then 2 years later, I finally came to visit Taiwan, those 5 weeks. I went around the island and I just absolutely loved it. It was so different from China. And yeah, just everybody was so friendly, everything's so convenient. Everyone says it's so convenient. But also as a vegan, I just felt like food fruit paradise. There's so much fruit. The landscape's incredible. There's there's sea, there's mountains. I was just like blown away by the experience, and the fact that this was a country where I could communicate with people as well, and I felt safe as a woman. It was like a really great time. And so I knew after that, I was like, I have to come back. I have to come back.
Yeah, yeah, Taiwan is really safe and convenient. So you mentioned you could communicate with the people here, so you're fluent in Mandarin as well, right?
I can say what I need to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are you the only international talent right now in your company?
We have a lot of foreign reporters, so people from different countries, the US, Australia, Canada. So I would say maybe about 60 to 70% of our team is Taiwanese. So a lot of international reporters do speak Mandarin. I think it just, obviously it makes the job a lot easier. A lot of us have lived here for a long time. We're very passionate about Taiwan, and we have a lot of friends here. We have lives here. And I think it's just a way of really getting to know Taiwan a lot on a much deeper level.
So what have you learned about working in cross-cultural or international environment?
So yeah, it's multicultural, it's multilingual. So the predominant language that we broadcast in is in English, but I think behind the scenes within the team, it's often easier and faster to use Mandarin. And I think that's important as well, because obviously we don't want to forget that we are in Taiwan. I want to learn Taiwanese. I feel like it would be so important, because like I'm often, I go down to Hainan or something, or in the south, and like go and interview farmers. Like I went to a rice farm when it was during the drought and stuff, interviewing the rice farmers. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just wish it's like that feeling. Like I don't like going to countries where I can't speak the language. I just feel really impolite. I'm like, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I'm gonna try and learn more Taiwanese.
Wow, then you're so good at languages. Do you find any difference in terms of like the style of working between when you were back in the UK and here in Taiwan?
Yes. I mean, it's a completely different work. So when I was back in the UK, I was back for a year in London doing that kind of 9 to 5 daily grind of working in an office. It was for a climate NGO, actually. So that was just after I'd been like, oh, climate, what's happening? I can't speak from the experience of a kind of typical Taiwanese company, because like I say, a lot of our staff are international, so we have our own rhythms of work. But I think for a lot of Taiwanese companies, there are very long hours. A lot of Taiwanese staff will work extremely hard into the night and not take breaks. We don't see that so much where I am at the moment, but this is what I've heard, from other colleagues and other people in different sectors. So I think that's the main difference, perhaps the work hours. Also, you just look at the statistics, like the amount of work that is put in here in Taiwan compared to countries in Europe, for example, is just kind of off the scale, really. There's a very different kind of work. I think also here there's very much an office culture for a lot of people. If you're at the office, it's counted as work. And so working remotely is like, it doesn't matter if you're not doing anything at the office. It's like if you're working remotely, that's not really considered proper work. And obviously in my newsroom, like, because we're often out on business trips or we're doing stuff out and about, so it's not so much the case. Like remote work is still work.
Okay, but luckily you don't have that experience here, right? Yeah, because you work in a more international environment.
I think it's kind of changing. Taiwan is now trying to reach out to attract international talent, and they know that a lot of people who come to Taiwan are not going to be happy with those kinds of working conditions. And I really hope that makes it better for Taiwanese staff as well. But like people are becoming more conscious about labor rights and like having more of a work-life balance, I think.
Well, it's definitely an interesting topic, but probably in Taiwan, you're right, it's not common here. Sally, thank you so much for sharing a lot of your experiences. I believe like somebody out there that right now are listening would be grateful for it, and they will learn something from it. So one last question, what advice would you give to anyone that want to start a career here in Taiwan?
Come here, get to know the country, really speak to Taiwanese people, understand where the intersections are between what you're passionate about and what Taiwan offers in that area. The more interested you are, and not just kind of like fake interest, but like real, you really have to know that this place is somewhere that you want to be. Don't be afraid of trying new things. I know a lot of people are very comfortable in their bubble and are too scared to like really go into unknown experiences. But I think that's been a huge part of my journey, has just been like throwing myself into the unknown and kind of figuring out as I go along. And I think that has been the main way that I have got to where I am now.
I think that's a really good advice. Yeah, because a lot of people, they need to find that intersection between their interests and what Taiwan can offer with them. Thank you so much for listening to Global and Vertical podcast with Sally. Show some love for sharing this with a friend that you know might benefit from this. And Sally, like, if people want to connect with you, how they should reach out to you?
They can find me on Twitter /X, as it's known now. I'm at SLJNSN, or you can just search for Sally Jensen on any kind of search engine. I'm sure I will come up.
Sally, thank you so much for making the time, and then see you on the next episode.